Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's American dream is apparently officially over. Yes, oh yes, the couple.
Harry had spent months believing the palace door was slowly reopening. Private signals had encouraged him, carefully worded messages had offered hope, and one possible meeting seemed close. Then, a sealed communication arrived from Charles, brief, final, and devastating enough to leave Harry questioning everything. The message came through the king's private office with a level of formality Harry immediately recognized. There was no personal greeting, no reference to shared memories, no quiet suggestion that another conversation might follow. Every sentence had been measured, cleared, and stripped of emotion. It did not read like a father reaching toward his son. It read like the crown drawing a line. That was what unsettled him most. For months, Harry had convinced himself that the silence was beginning to soften. Small signals had arrived through trusted friends, legal representatives, and carefully chosen intermediaries. Nothing had been promised directly, but enough had been implied to keep hope alive. Perhaps Meghan could return under strict conditions. Perhaps one private family gathering could open the way to something larger. Harry believed patience might succeed where public confrontation had failed. He had invested more than pride in that possibility. He imagined returning not as a defeated prince seeking forgiveness, but as a husband and father trying to prevent the same emotional distance from passing to Archie and Lilibet. He wanted his children to know Charles as more than a name tied to a crown. He wanted them protected from the cold inheritance of royal silence. But the palace saw danger where Harry saw healing. Meghan's return could never be treated as one simple visit. The moment she entered a royal residence, every detail would carry meaning. Where she sat, who greeted her, whether she stood beside Harry, whether Catherine approached her, whether Charles appeared warm or guarded. One photograph could be called reconciliation. One gesture could be seen as surrender. One private conversation could create months of speculation. Charles had been trapped between two loyalties. As a father, he wanted to leave a path open. As king, he was being warned that uncertainty was weakening the institution. Somewhere between those pressures, the language of the message had changed. Harry could not stop thinking about William. He wondered whether his brother had pushed for this final tone or simply warned Charles what Meghan's return might unleash. There was no proof, only suspicion. Meghan was not there when Harry read the message. He read it once, then again, searching for flexibility hidden between the lines. There was none. The words had been designed to prevent hope, not encourage it. And so Harry made a decision of his own. He would not tell Meghan yet. Not until he understood who had shaped the message, what had happened behind palace doors, and whether the future they had discussed had already been taken from them. But the message was only the final page of a struggle that had begun weeks earlier, when Meghan's possible return quietly divided the palace into rival camps. Before Charles reached his decision, Meghan's name had already ignited a hidden battle across royal households. Some feared another public explosion. Others warned that permanent exclusion would deepen the family wound. Behind closed doors, one question dominated every discussion. Could Meghan return without changing the monarchy itself? The discussions had begun quietly, far from public statements and carefully managed appearances. Senior courtiers, communications advisors, security officials, and representatives from separate royal households were drawn into a series of private meetings. Each entered with a different fear. Some worried about family damage. Others feared institutional humiliation. None believed the matter could be treated as a simple act of forgiveness. Meghan's return carried too many unresolved questions. Would she retain a visible position beside Harry? What security would be provided? Could she enter private royal spaces? Would the palace recognize the visit publicly? And most dangerously, who would control the story once she arrived? One group argued for a narrow compromise. Meghan could accompany Harry to a private family gathering, but there would be no balcony appearance, no formal procession, no state occasion, and no suggestion that she had resumed royal duties. Her access would be limited. Her presence would be personal, not official. But the opposing side believed that distinction would collapse immediately. The moment Meghan entered Britain, the world would watch. Every greeting would be examined. Every silence would become an accusation. Even a private visit could become a global spectacle before the palace had time to respond. Trust became the central issue. Courtiers remembered earlier conversations that later emerged in public, along with interviews and accusations that exposed private family pain. Their concern was not only what Meghan might say during the visit, it was what might be said afterward, once memories, motives, and private exchanges were retold beyond palace control. Charles understood the danger, but he also saw the human cost. Archie and Lilibet were growing up far from him, and he feared they might one day believe their grandfather had rejected them. Yet he refused to let that emotional legacy become pressure against the crown. Camilla reportedly viewed the crisis through Charles's well-being. Renewed conflict, she feared, could pull him back into a cycle of hope, disappointment, and public strain. William's position was harder. He believed every exception granted today would become a problem he inherited tomorrow. Catherine's name was raised too, because any reunion would revive comparisons, rivalries, and relentless judgment of her smallest reaction. Still, Charles resisted permanent exclusion. He ordered advisors to prepare conditions for Meghan's return. Then, something changed. A proposed agreement that had seemed possible suddenly collapsed after new information reached the king, forcing him to reconsider whether the entire negotiation had been built on trust that did not exist. The return plan had survived distrust, family resistance, and political risk, but it could not survive the discovery that reached Charles just before he was prepared to approve it. The palace had created what it believed was the only possible compromise: Meghan could return, but only under rules designed to prevent another royal crisis. To Charles, the conditions protected the family. To Meghan, they represented humiliation, and her reaction would push the negotiations toward a point of no return. The offer was narrow from the beginning. Meghan could accompany Harry to one private family occasion, but the palace would not call it a royal return. There would be no official reconciliation, no restored position, and no suggestion that she had stepped back into the life she once left behind. The restrictions went further. Meghan would not join formal ceremonies, appear on a palace balcony, enter a state procession, or stand in any position that implied she had resumed duties within the working monarchy. She could return as Harry's wife, but not as a representative of the crown. Every public detail would be controlled. There would be no private briefings to selected journalists, no personal photographer inside royal residences, and no later account of family conversations without prior agreement. To the palace, these rules created protection. To Meghan, they created suspicion. Security would also be limited to the approved location and duration of the visit. Harry considered that difficult but manageable. Meghan saw something more painful. In her eyes, the family was not preparing to welcome her. It was preparing to contain her. Then came the condition that changed everything. Meghan would not be permitted to enter certain private apartments or sensitive royal archives. Any meeting with Charles would take place with senior staff close enough to ensure that no conversation could later be disputed. The message was unmistakable. Trust had not been restored. For Meghan, accepting those terms meant returning under a visibly reduced status. The palace could present her presence as proof that she had finally accepted its authority. She feared that every restriction would be used to show that she had come back defeated. Harry tried to calm the situation. He argued that accepting the conditions once could reopen trust. One peaceful visit might create another. Refusing, he warned, would allow palace opponents to claim Meghan had never truly wanted reconciliation. But Meghan would not accept reconciliation without dignity. To her, silence under surveillance was not healing. It was submission. Harry sent a private response asking Charles to soften several conditions. He believed his father would understand that Meghan could not return appearing publicly diminished. The palace read the request differently. Advisors saw it as an attempt to rewrite an agreement before the first step had even been taken. Then, fragments of the confidential proposal allegedly began circulating beyond the immediate negotiating circle. Charles was left with one question. If the preliminary discussions could not remain private, what would happen after Meghan entered palace grounds? That question transformed the dispute from a disagreement over protocol into a test of loyalty, and it brought William into the conversation Charles had tried to keep between father and son. William had remained publicly silent, but inside the palace his patience had reached its limit. When Charles asked for his final assessment, William did not speak as Harry's brother. He spoke as the future king, and the warning he delivered made Meghan's return appear more dangerous than Charles had imagined. The conversation became the decisive moment before the ruling. Charles still wanted to preserve a path back for Harry, however narrow. William believed that every open path had become another opportunity for the monarchy to be pulled into endless negotiation. To him, Meghan's return could not be separated from Harry's unresolved battle with the institution. Even if she obeyed every condition, the appearance of reconciliation could later be used to demand more. Greater security. Restored privileges. A stronger ceremonial position. What began as one private gathering could quickly become proof that the old boundaries no longer applied. William warned that uncertainty had become the palace's greatest weakness. Every delayed answer created hope in California, anxiety among courtiers, and fresh speculation outside the family. The monarchy, he argued, could not continue living between invitation and refusal. It needed a settled position. Yet beneath that strategy was pain William rarely allowed anyone to see. Harry was not simply a difficult relative or a public critic. He was the brother who had stood beside him through grief, duty, and the crushing expectations that followed Diana's death. That history made the decision harder, but it did not make trust less necessary. Affection, William allegedly told Charles, could not replace confidence. A father might forgive privately. A king still had to decide who represented the crown, who entered protected spaces, and who could be trusted not to turn private moments into future controversy. Catherine's position also weighed heavily. Meghan's return would force her into a public performance she could not win. Distance would be called hostility. Warmth would be interpreted as surrender. Charles raised Archie and Lilibet. He feared that closing the door on Meghan could also cost him his grandchildren. William's answer was severe. Family contact and royal access had to remain separate. The crown could not be governed through emotional pressure. Charles resisted. Permanent decisions, he warned, created permanent wounds. If Meghan was excluded, Harry might disappear with her. William replied that Harry was not being barred from returning privately. The obstacle was Harry's insistence that Meghan's institutional acceptance must come before his own relationship with his father could heal. The disagreement exposed another tension. Some advisors feared Charles's hope was weakening William's future authority. Others suspected William was already imposing the harder monarchy he intended to inherit. Then he presented the pattern: previous concessions, quiet approaches, and private negotiations that had allegedly ended in public controversy or renewed demands. The latest proposal no longer looked like a final compromise. It looked like the beginning of another cycle. Charles said nothing for a long moment. William's argument was ruthless, but it rested on the responsibility Charles himself had placed upon him as heir. Finally, The king ordered a document prepared. It would separate Harry's place within the family from Meghan's future relationship with the working monarchy. By the following morning, Charles had made the choice everyone feared, and when Harry finally understood its full meaning, there was no room left for negotiation. The answer was not another postponement, temporary restriction, or demand for patience. Charles had reached a permanent conclusion. Harry could seek a private path back to his father, but Meghan would not be restored to royal life. The distinction was brutal, and it left Harry completely stunned. The document made the decision unmistakable. Meghan would not return as a working royal. She would not resume ceremonial duties, regain an official position, or be presented by the palace as having been restored to the institution she had left behind. Yet Charles had stopped short of imposing a total ban. Meghan could still enter Britain. She might attend a private family occasion in exceptional circumstances, but any future appearance would remain personal, tightly controlled, and completely separate from the monarchy's public life. For Harry, one narrow route remained open. He could request private meetings with his father. He could return under agreed conditions and attempt to rebuild their damaged relationship. But he would have to do so without first securing Meghan's institutional acceptance. That distinction struck him like a betrayal. Harry did not see himself and Meghan as two separate cases. They had left together, endured the consequences together, and built a new life together. An invitation that welcomed him while keeping his wife at a distance felt less like reconciliation and more like a test of loyalty. What made the ruling harder to challenge was its tone. There were no accusations, insults, or emotional attacks. The language centered on trust, continuity, constitutional responsibility, and the need to remove uncertainty over who represented the crown. The calmness felt cruel. Harry had nothing dramatic to confront, nothing obvious to disprove. The words did not attack him. They simply closed the argument. His thoughts turned immediately to William. In Harry's mind, his brother had won. Charles had accepted the separation William wanted, family contact for Harry, but no royal restoration for Meghan. Charles, however, did not view the decision as a victory. He understood what it might cost him. Harry could remain distant. Archie and Lilibet could grow even further beyond his reach, but allowing the question to remain unresolved had begun to damage every relationship around it. Then came the most painful clarification. Family bonds, future financial arrangements, and the children's connection to their grandfather would not be linked to Meghan's place within the monarchy. Harry could no longer use one issue to reopen the other. He called a trusted intermediary and demanded to know whether the decision was truly final. The answer was devastating. Charles would not reconsider unless circumstances changed in a way the palace regarded as extraordinary. Harry fell silent. He had prepared to fight over security, ceremony, and access. He had not prepared for a path home that Meghan could not share equally. When he finally told her, Meghan listened without interrupting. Then she asked one question. Had Charles made the decision himself, or had William made it for him? Meghan's question did not produce comfort. It awakened a far more dangerous suspicion about who now controlled the gates of the monarchy, and what Harry was expected to sacrifice to pass through them. Meghan did not react with tears, pleading, or surprise. She recognized the decision for what she believed it was, an attempt to divide her from Harry and make him prove his loyalty by returning alone. But her refusal to accept that arrangement would place Harry under unbearable pressure. To Meghan, the palace had done more than deny her a royal role. It had created a test for her husband. If Harry returned without her, the institution could claim that he had accepted its authority, separated his future from hers, and chosen blood over the life they had built together. She reminded him of everything they had survived after leaving royal life. The criticism, the isolation, the pressure placed on their marriage. Returning alone, she argued, would give fresh strength to those who had always believed their relationship would eventually break beneath the weight of the crown. Harry insisted that he had no intention of abandoning her, but beneath that certainty was fear. If he rejected Charles's offer completely, he might lose the final path back to his father. The decision was no longer about ceremony or status. It had become a choice between two relationships he could not imagine living without. Meghan questioned whether Charles's private invitation was genuine at all. She suspected that any meeting would be controlled, carefully observed, and used to draw Harry back toward the royal system one step at a time, while keeping her permanently outside it. Advisors beyond the palace urged them to respond publicly before royal sources shaped the story. If they stayed silent, the decision could be presented as balanced, compassionate, and entirely reasonable. Harry understood the danger of that silence. But he also understood the danger of speaking. One furious statement could confirm every palace warning about trust and destroy the narrow route Charles had left open. Meghan resisted the idea that silence offered protection. In her view, silence allowed unnamed insiders to portray her as difficult, demanding, and unwilling to reconcile. She feared something deeper than exclusion. She feared erasure. She would not allow royal history to suggest that Harry had returned only after she disappeared from the story. Still, she was not rejecting Britain entirely. Meghan was willing to consider a private visit, but only with written guarantees concerning security, respectful treatment, and protection from arrangements designed to diminish her. Harry decided he needed one final conversation with Charles. He wanted to hear the ruling directly, without courtiers, documents, or carefully filtered messages standing between them. The palace agreed, but with one condition: the discussion would concern Harry's relationship with his father, not Meghan's restoration. That condition exposed the trap. Even speaking to Charles required Harry to accept the separation he opposed. To enter the conversation, he would have to leave Meghan's case outside the room. Harry agreed to the conversation, believing he could still change his father's heart, but Charles was prepared to reveal why the decision had become impossible to reverse. When Harry finally heard his father's voice, he expected distance, formality, perhaps even anger. What he did not expect was sadness. Charles did not accuse Meghan or demand an apology. Instead, he explained what the crown had cost him, and why he would no longer let Harry's marriage determine the monarchy's boundaries. The call began with silence. Neither man seemed certain whether he was speaking as father and son, or as king and former working royal. Years of grief, accusation, and unfinished conversations stood between them, making even the simplest greeting feel heavy. Harry broke the silence first. He asked whether William had forced the decision. Charles refused to place the blame on the Prince of Wales. He admitted that many voices had been heard, some cautious and others uncompromising, but the responsibility was his alone. He had made the final choice. Then he explained the separation Harry had always rejected. There was his love for his son, there was his affection for Archie and Lilibet, and there was the question of whether Meghan could again be trusted within the royal institution. Charles insisted that these were three different matters. Harry called that distinction emotionally dishonest. Meghan was not a political issue he could leave outside a meeting. She was his wife, the mother of his children, and the person who remained beside him when he believed the family had abandoned him. Charles answered quietly. Marriage might make Harry and Meghan inseparable in private life, but it could not force the crown to restore an official position after institutional trust had collapsed. That was the wound Harry could barely accept. His father was offering love without belonging, contact without full acceptance, and family without the shared dignity Harry believed protected Meghan from public humiliation. Charles said he feared repeating one of the monarchy's oldest failures, allowing private pain to remain unresolved until it became a crisis for the institution. A final boundary, he argued, was kinder than years of promises neither side truly believed. Harry brought Diana into the conversation, accusing the palace of once again choosing stability over emotional truth. Charles warned him not to use the suffering of the past to force a decision in the present. Then came the question of legacy. Archie and Lilibet, Charles insisted, would always be his grandchildren. Their connection to him could not become a bargaining tool for Meghan's royal position. Harry asked whether she might ever be reconsidered. Charles said forgiveness remained possible. Personal contact might also be possible. But restoration to royal life was no longer under active consideration. There would be no review, no waiting period, no hidden process. Charles told Harry the door remained open to him as a son. Harry answered that a door too narrow for his family was not truly open. Then he ended the call without saying goodbye. The conversation ended, but its consequences were only beginning, because Harry's next move would decide whether the royal rift entered a quieter phase or exploded beyond repair. Harry was now trapped between two futures. Returning alone could be seen as betraying Meghan. Staying away could destroy his final chance with Charles, and while the world waited for a public reaction, the palace quietly prepared for the possibility that the Sussex conflict was about to enter its most dangerous chapter. 3 choices stood before him, and none offered peace. He could accept private contact with Charles and try to rebuild the relationship quietly. He could reject the offer completely and remain beside Meghan without compromise. Or he could challenge the decision publicly, exposing what he believed was an attempt to divide his marriage from his place within the royal family. Each path carried a different cost. Silence might preserve access to Charles, but it could make Harry appear defeated. Public retaliation might defend Meghan, yet it would confirm the palace's deepest fears about privacy and control. Returning alone could heal the bond between father and son while creating a new fracture at home. Meghan urged him not to react immediately. In her view, the ruling was designed to force a hurried choice before they could shape their own response. She wanted time, strategy, and certainty. Harry wanted answers that no longer seemed available. Inside the palace, advisors prepared for the decision to become public. Their explanation would be calm and disciplined. This was not punishment. They would insist. It was a clear separation between private family relationships and official royal duty. William believed that clarity was necessary. But even he understood the danger. He had secured the institutional boundary he wanted, yet Harry might now become harder, more distant, and permanently unreachable. The future king may have protected the monarchy while losing his brother. Charles faced a different kind of suffering. He had ended uncertainty, but he had also created a future in which Harry could remain beyond his reach. Archie and Lilibet would grow up connected to royal history through blood, yet separated from it by decisions made among adults who no longer trusted one another enough to share the same room. Meghan might still return to Britain one day, but not as the restored Duchess imagined by supporters or the defeated outsider imagined by critics. Any visit would become a controlled confrontation with an institution that had formally moved forward without her. Harry began considering one symbolic act, a brief visit to Charles, not as a returning royal, but as a son. He could make clear that he had accepted contact without accepting Meghan's exclusion. Yet another threat remained. Charles's decision might not end the question. It might simply transfer it to William, a future king with far less emotional hesitation. Everyone believed they were protecting something. Charles protected the crown. William protected the future. Meghan protected her dignity. Harry protected his family. And still, every act of protection drove them further apart. Harry kept the palace message. He could not destroy it. It was both an invitation and a rejection, proof that his father still wanted him. but only under terms he might never accept. And so Charles's final decision does not close the royal story, it creates a new and more painful question. How long can Harry remain loyal to both the family he was born into and the family he chose?